With the Investing News Network, I'm Scott Tibbles. I'm here today at PDAC Day 2 in Toronto, and joining me now is Luisa Moreno. She is Managing Director of Tahuti Global here in Toronto. Thank you so much for joining me, Luisa.
Thank you, Scott.
So you're an expert on rare earths, and as all our readers will know, rare earths has been up and down in the news in the past 6 months. And every time we find ourselves talking about rare earths, we also find ourselves talking about China. So my main question here is, given that there are so many rare earths companies that operate outside of China, and China dominates the market so much, is there hope for them? Is there space for them to operate and survive with China basically cornering the market so much right now?
Yes, I truly believe it is possible, but it will take time. So if you look at the history of China, China did not always dominate rare earth. So they have to learn how to process their deposits. They have to found the deposits, they did exploration as well, and then they did extensive metallurgy. I came across a few papers, and it took years, up to 20 or more in some of these deposits. So with deposits and companies outside China, the effort has to be the same. So it's going to take some time. So we know, for instance, that the Linus, the project probably started, if I'm not wrong, around 2005, or maybe perhaps a little bit earlier. But it was not until about 2013, 2014, or even now, right? It has been slowly that they have started producing in a more efficient manner, and to the point where they can be, somewhat profitable. So it just takes time from exploring to then start developing the project, doing all the metallurgy, and then go through the process of financing, construction, and all these different things. So the model, I think, for the West is slightly different from China. We know that Chinese companies, some of them have a lot of support from the government. The model in the West, or here in Canada, we use the capital markets. That's where most of these exploration companies go and really do the financing and get the money to develop their projects. So that also is another factor that delays the process a little bit. But this is a process of knowledge. So you find a deposit and then you study it. So it's not so much a problem of the size of the deposit. I think metallurgy is really a key component. And so spending time doing the necessary metallurgical work, it's very, very, very important. And unfortunately, it's not one size fits all. So you're going to have to find solutions, let's call it metallurgical solutions, for each deposit. That is usually when you think about processing, there's two terms, what they call the cracking and the separation. And so for both stages, for the most part, they are unique. The cracking more so than the separation, but the separation as well, because it involves, you need to know the percentages of each element and what elements you're really going to recover. And because it varies slightly for the lights from one deposit to the other, but then when you start comparing lights and heavies, there are some differences. And so the separation plant will be different as well. So companies have to work to find solutions for that particular individual deposit.
And touching back on, you mentioned government support. So just in the past few months, when we talk about rare earths in the West, we also tend to talk about government support as well. You said that all we need is time. Do we need a healthy dose of government support at the same time? Just a few months ago, there was the news that the U.S. Army was seeking to support projects in the United States. The United States itself has signed agreements with their counterparts in Australia to do something to sort of collaborate and work together and try to support their industries. What do you rate of these efforts, mainly by the United States? What do you think of it?
I think it's definitely positive. The U.S. and Canada also signed an agreement, and I think those agreements are positive. They have to. I think they have to allocate good amounts of financial support. and be selective on the projects that perhaps should be prioritized. But I don't know exactly what numbers are we talking about in terms if there's any financing, what kind of support. I've heard about, I know that, for instance, US have signed agreements with different countries in different continents. And the focus was to help them develop their resources, identify them, and so forth. But that is the very beginning. And again, as far as rare earths is concerned, the issue is not so much identifying resources, whether we have it or not. It's there. There are quite a lot of projects. It's really to be able to zoom in a few of the most advanced and perhaps the most prospective ones, and start investing on those. And then be patient. It could take 10 years. It can take more. But I think it's totally possible. So China is not going to dominate the production of rare earths forever. I don't know that they're necessarily interested in that. I think there is an increase in demand, and we should likely see a continued increase in demand. And it would make sense to have additional supply coming from outside China, because you also allow China to preserve some of their resources. So we will see how that all moves. But in terms of government support, I think there is an intention from the various governments. There's definitely a lot of support for initiatives, and you see a few networks, rare earth networks in Europe, in America, and folks are brainstorming around the issues. But I think that the next stage is probably to see a more financial support for these companies, in terms of processing, research around that. Again, unfortunately, it's not like, investing in research for lithium-ion batteries, because once you find out what it is and everybody can use it, again, it's very deposit-specific, but it has to be done.
And speaking of demand, so it is quite an opaque industry, as many have said before. Whenever companies talk about the benefits of their projects, a lot of them seem to focus on defense industries and that sort of approach. What sort of demand are we looking at from those industries? I mean, rare earths, they're mined in quite small quantities, and when they're used in these technologies, they're used in quite small quantities. So what sort of volume are we looking at? Is it not much at all, or is it quite significant?
It depends, again, obviously it depends on the application, but if we look at some of the elements, let's say, they are the most consumed. So if we zoom in, for instance, in the magnets, so you have the neodymium magnets, they have a little bit of they have a little bit of praseodymium as well, and some of them also have dysprosium or terbium, depending on the applications. And so if there has been forecasts around the potential demand for neodymium magnets for permanent magnet motors. And those are used, and it could be potentially mass adopted for electric vehicles. So that there's a direct link there. So if you look at the decisions that have been made by governments around the world to try to phase out the combustion engine vehicles and adopt the electric ones, I mean, there will be a need for quite a lot of these strategic materials, because there are about, I'm not sure exactly the number last year, but sales of vehicles, passenger vehicles, are about 90 million a year. And right now, how many electric vehicles are really being sold? Less than 2 million. That's my understanding. Yeah. And so if you imagine one day that most of the vehicles are going to be electric or hybrid, there's going to be need for a lot of these strategic materials that basically make it possible to have lithium-ion batteries or in this case, the type of permanent magnet mortars that require the neodymium. So that is an enormous number.
So there is a lot of potential for demand for industries that more people are going to use. It's not just a defense industry thing, which a lot of companies seem to sort of suggest. I've found going around and talking to them.
Yes, I mean, I think the reason why they bring defense is because the budget for defense, especially in US, is huge, right? And when there is something which is critical for defense, there is a lot of effort, and somehow the price tag is not as important or relevant. So I think it makes it a little bit more critical if the defense industry says we absolutely need it. And so in that sense, I think that's why people always bring the defense and say, look, these things are used in missiles and, in other technologies that the defense industry needs it. And if they need it, we need to supply it, because obviously it doesn't make sense for them to be, if we talk about the US, for instance, to be dependent on China or any other country for that matter. So I think in that sense, that's why they bring that.
So it's to do with marketing for the most part.
Perhaps, but it's a little bit of a reality as well, if it's really essential and is important.
But I bring up marketing in the sense that it's a good excuse for a company in our roads to maybe add an extra zero to the end of the contract.
Correct.
And just wrapping up, so recently in a trade deal that was announced between China and the United States, there was an interesting addition that the United States would be, China would be buying rare earths from America. What do you make of that, given that the United States has ranked a lot of these minerals as critical for them and they need to protect their sources? Why are they suddenly looking to sell?
Because they have no option, really, right? So that is, as far as I understand, ongoing mining in Mountain Pass. We know Molycorp used to own Mountain Pass, and it was, commissioning a plant to build a bigger plant. And they were commissioning, and there was lots of issues. And so they end up filing for bankruptcy in 2015. But since then, there has been efforts to bring back the project and bring back the mine and the processing plant. So the processing plant, again, metallurgy is always an issue. And it's a bit surprising because, there has been production at Mountain Pass, even though it was not that much. It has been there. I think before they filed the IPO, it was about 3,000 tons, and throughout their development, I think they listed in 2010. There was some production coming out of Mountain Pass, but that effort to increase production to 20,000 tons, and then they even thought about 40,000 tons, didn't quite work. So they had some challenges. And so they will get there eventually, I think. But right now, I believe they are mining. So they're mining, producing a concentrate. And so what do you do with it? You could, there's not a lot of places that you can send the concentrate to be processed. And so they are sending it to mostly, I believe they're still sending some to Estonia as well. But I'm not sure. I'm not totally sure that it's cracked. I'm not sure if it's a mineral concentrate or whether it's a chemical concentrate that's been produced and exported. I probably should know that, but I'm not quite sure. I have the feeling that is a mineral concentrate. And so if that is a mineral concentrate, it still has to be cracked. So I guess it has to go to China first. It's a natural place. It's where they have capacity to process it. And then from there on, it can then be exported, like I said, to Estonia and other places where they have separation facilities and can adjust to the different combinations of the distribution, I should say, in the chemical concentrate to then separate it. But so my understanding is that yes, they're sending most of it right now, and they have been sending it if I'm not wrong, since 2018. 2018 they sent 2019 as well. So even before they signed that agreement, they were already sending, concentrate to China. Like I said, there's not a lot of options, so it makes total sense that they will do that until they figure out how to actually process it and separate individual elements, refine them the way they used to, and start producing the elements they were producing before.
Fantastic. Well, then, with that, I think that we will wrap up there. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me, Luisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And again, with the Investing News Network, I'm Scott Tibbles, and I've been having a chat with Luisa Moreno.